Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born, and today we are diving back into my book. We are now in chapter 6, and I'm so excited because in this chapter, we are going to explore everything we need to know about the product development framework. And so we are going to dive deep, talk about how to surface innovation as a group, as a team, as a company. And of course, I have my behind the scenes partner back joining me today, Moriah Hidden. Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Natalie. I am super excited about our topic today and just diving into practical ways that organizations can bring innovation inside. And so, yeah, I'm super excited for all of the examples and all the ways that you kind of teach how an organization can do this. So, we're going to dive straight in. In this chapter, you talk about numerous different examples and ways that organizations can intentionally surface innovation from different business plan competitions, hackathons, and customer incubation sessions. Why do you think it's so important for leaders to create intentional spaces for ideas to emerge instead of waiting for innovation to happen naturally?
Yeah, so let's think about this for a second. As much as we think it's true, innovation rarely happens by accident, right? So most employees, even if we think about our own schedule day to day, it's pretty highly consumed with all the responsibilities and deadlines and the operational demands of things that we must get done, that must get accomplished. So if leaders are not intentional, not only with themselves, but also with their teams to create space for innovation, oftentimes the urgent work that we have on our plate often suffocates our ability to be really focused and to think about the future. And so I think organizations, as we think about innovation, we have to be more deliberate in our desire to innovate and our desire to bring it forward. So that's why in the book I give so many different ways that you can do this because it's not a one size fits all, right? For some people, they're very customer centric, and it would be really easy to pull 10 customers into their office in a month and have them whiteboarding and talking about a solution and bringing it to life. For others, they may be more employee centric, so it makes sense to do that same session but bring in all their employees and talk about some of the challenges. So I've provided a bunch of different ideas in the book about how you can get innovation programs started in your organization, but the goal is to always be intentional. No matter what you do with innovation, be intentional, and that sends a message to the rest of the organization that we actually care about surfacing the ideas that you have and that the customer has and seeing those ideas through. So I get really excited when we talk about this because there's just so many different ways that we can surface ideas. The goal is just to do it, to get started, and to just see that journey out.
I love that. And I just feel encouraged when you're like, there are so many different ways, and the ways and the examples that you give can hit different strong skills that some organizations may have. And then even bring out some organizations' weak points of being like, hey, we need to look more into our employees instead of our clients. So that's awesome. I loved your examples and story about the business plan competition and just an amazing trip that you even got to go on because of this. Can you go deeper into the specifics of a business plan competition? What do they actually look like inside of an organization, and how can leaders successfully create and facilitate them in a way that encourages employees to bring forward innovative ideas, but also using your personal example and what that taught you and the lessons that you learned through it?
Yeah, so so it was a really funny story that I shared about the business plan competition. I tell you about kind of the ins and outs of it, but I also tell you my funny story of where and how I crashed and burned, which I think is really important for us to laugh at ourselves every once in a while. And I think that the beautiful part was I was in an environment that allowed me to laugh at myself a little bit. And I think sometimes we're too structured, we're too serious to the point that people are actually afraid to fail. What I love about these business plan competitions that we were a part of is it did a couple things. The first thing it did is it taught employees to critically think. We had to think not like an employee, but like an entrepreneur, like a business owner. And so we were talking about EBITDA and looking at spreadsheets to say how much sales revenue could we bring in? What are our operational costs, right? An employee oftentimes, unless they're in finance or in sales, doesn't really look at the world that way. So you're forcing all of these employees to take a look, a 360 look at a business and say, oh, this is what it actually takes to run. Now, the beautiful thing about that is whether or not they win the competition, they're now smarter operating inside of your business, so they're actually able to be more effective. The other thing, when I think about these business plan competitions, it's not just about the goal of innovation, it's also ownership, right? Like, how do we create owners in the organization? And I think these competitions do this. So let's talk about the good. Maybe makeup of a good business plan competition. The first thing is we got to pay for good ideas. What I loved about this competition is the winner got $50,000, but the people that did not win, they came in second, third, fourth, they still got $10,000 for their idea. So imagine pitching an idea to your company. Maybe you don't win. Maybe we'll put it on the back burner and look at it later. But at the end of the day, you did all of this work and now you get a cash prize at the end of this journey. The other thing that was really cool about the business plan ideas that I surfaced in this book that we went through is we all got a mentor. So oftentimes when you have an idea, you only can see in part, right? You have a good piece of it, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. And when you bring mentors along, other people that have been there before you, they're like, hey, did you think about customer acquisition? Did you think about how we're going to validate this in the market? Do you know how to financially model, right? And if you're not in finance, a lot of times that's overwhelming. How are you going to allocate resources? How many do you need? What are the risks? How do we mitigate those risks? And then how do we operationally execute this plan across the board? So the beautiful thing about that is when we're able to help people think about holistic business instead of just, I have an idea, it really creates this critical thinking business MBA, right? That you're giving to all these people where now they come out really knowing how to think about an idea end to end. Not just, I have an idea, I think it's cool, we should do it, but here are the pros and cons of this idea. Here's what works and doesn't work. And here's what we need to do to make this even more effective. Now you have created a whole bench of leaders that can lead your organization.
No, that's good. And it's encouraging to know that like everyone had skin in the game. So like to the leadership, to you guys bringing your ideas to the leadership, they were like, no, we want to know. We're going to be there with you guys. And you also said beginning with the end in mind, like from the whole beginning to the end, you had a mentor to be able to help you think through all of those different processes, which is really cool. And there's a bunch of lessons that are learned in that whole aspect of it. So I think that's awesome. You share several examples of testing ideas before fully investing in them. Why do you believe so many organizations struggle with iteration and rapid testing? And how can leaders create cultures where experimentation feels safe?
Okay, so this is such an important question that you're asking. I think that organizations struggle with experimentation because oftentimes we overinvest in planning, we actually underinvest in learning. And here's what I mean by that. We spend months coming up with a very perfect plan that is not going to work in execution, but we really think it is. And then we're exhausted and a little bit frustrated by the time it gets time to execute this thing and then it's falling off the rails. So what we really try to do when we give people an innovation mindset is we need to fail fast, fail cheap, fail often, right? We got to move that learning forward. So we want to experiment a little bit smaller to help us learn from those risks and save us time and money and all the other resources that go with innovation. Because oftentimes, when I talk to someone and they're like, man, I've been planning this thing for 6 months or a year, I get really concerned because they're taking too long to learn. And so when leaders create safety around failure and testing, what actually happens is, yes, sometimes our experiment could succeed, but if we must succeed and not fail, then we stop taking risks. And so I have a, specific example of a customer I worked with several years ago. And I said, you guys are so built around innovation. Why is nothing getting out? Like, why are we not actually launching any innovations? And they said, well, even people that have come from other companies that are innovative, somehow when they get here, they struggle to innovate. And I said, well, what are the stories that you guys tell of innovation? And everybody across the board said, Oh yeah, there's this one story of this person that failed with innovation and they were fired. And I'm like, wow, I think I know why everyone is afraid to take risks. There's a psychological safety layer that we have not enacted where people don't feel that they can actually innovate and fail. They feel that if they must succeed. So what happens is no one is innovating, no one's moving because I don't want to be the story. I don't want to be the tall tale that is spread throughout the office of the person who tried that one time to innovate and failed. So, part of what we are looking at here is what are the guardrails we need to innovate? And if psychological safety is not in your organization, that's the first tactic, right? That's the first thing we have to attack. And then we have to look at what do we actually do in order to allow people to fail safely and learn from that. And I know we'll talk about failure in our next chapter a little bit more, but this is such a critical component to innovation is how do we create the right momentum at the right time, giving people the safety to actually be able to see their ideas through. And it can't be you must succeed or else. It has to be you must learn. And if we're learning, then we're actually growing.
Yeah, that's good. And I remember even us talking about this in the podcast previous of like, your plan does not have to be perfect for the first one, and you need to test it out at least 10 times before you can finally be like, okay, we've learned from our mistakes, we've learned from the client, from our team, from our leadership, we've gotten that feedback because feedback is a gift, and then being able to learn from that and be able to finally have an idea worth sharing. And the psychological safety is so important. And we've talked about that numerous times as well. You're not going to want to give ideas if it gets shut down every time. And it comes back to empowerment as well. You're not going to want to give ideas if your leadership is taking those ideas and running with them and not giving you any credit. So I think it is encouraging just to sit back as a leader and see where is our team at, where's the health, guardrails and all those different things. So that's so good. Um, Talking about the product development framework, you walk through a simple product development framework that includes surfacing ideas, testing, prototyping, measuring success, and adjusting along the way. Can you dive deeper into this framework and why it is a great tool to use for innovation?
Yeah, so let's think about frameworks and why do we need frameworks? Part of it is we don't want to recreate the wheel every time it's time to start something or innovate. Like we want to have kind of a good framework built that works for our organization. And so in the book, I kind of shared just a simple framework that we can use if people don't have one. And the first thing that I love is team up, like just creating and pulling cross-functional teams together to begin whiteboarding, mapping out processes. Teaming up is so important because, there's a beauty in, going across the organization to pull people together. Each person has a different facet of the organization that the other person does not have. And when you pull all these people together, it just creates this synchronization of ideas and thoughts of like, okay, this makes more sense now because we had Moriah join and Moriah has talked to 5 customers this week. And so as we're coming up with all these ideas, she's able to help build on them because she's having these in-depth conversations with customers. But then there's this idea of like testing it out. So again, we spend too much time planning and not enough time learning. So we actually have to break that down into smaller, I call it innovation projects, where we can actually move faster and adjust. Not just, what did not work, but what could we do to make it better? What needs to be true for this thing to be successful? So you talked about it early, Mariah, but iterating through what we're doing in order to improve it over time versus planning in a room for a year and then trying to launch this thing and hoping it's successful. We want to launch, small pieces to customers along the way and have them giving us feedback along the way so that we're building that. And then I think what's really important is we need to pitch our idea to our teams and our senior leaders. Like, if they're not bought in, our ideas won't see the light of day anyway.
Right.
So we've got to get them on board. We have to get them thinking through the idea. We have to get them engaging with it, talking to us about it. And we have to show them how this is going to improve either collaboration, cost, time, money, all of those things. So oftentimes when we put an idea in front of a senior leader, it helps us to sharpen and strengthen it and see it all the way through. But there's this other piece we get to, which is adjusting, right? Like we've gotta adjust based on the feedback we are hearing. And oftentimes people don't want to hear the feedback because again, we get too excited about our idea. Our idea becomes so precious that we fall in love with our idea. We actually need to fall in love with the customer's problem, not our idea. And we need to solve their problem through what we're trying to build. And then the last thing I would say is try it, right? So we need to be able to launch it out there in the world. We need to incubate it quickly with some trusted customers who will be really honest, give us feedback, and then we need to run through those cycles again. Again, where I think companies fail, where I think people fail, is that innovation is less about getting it right the first time and it's more about learning faster than our competition. So organizations that win are those that experiment, they adapt, and they keep moving fast. And that cycle is very rapid and it's quick so that they can get from one end of the phase to the other. And when we think about AI, right, the power of AI, those cycles are much more faster and more rapid than they've ever been before because we can surface learnings faster, we can create prototypes faster than we ever had before. So that there's just a beauty that beforehand, if you were a person of, one or a team of 10 or five, you had to like bring in all these people to do this. Now, with the power of AI, there's a lot more at our fingertips that we can do without having to hire a whole team in order to see us move fast.
That's awesome. And I love the examples and the actual logistics of how this looks and every single step, how it looks. I know we're going to talk about it next chapter, but every single step could possibly fail and it could
Yes.
possibly not be the best outcome that you're hoping for. But it's encouraging to know that it is a cycle. And like you said, you take the feedback in every single step. You take it, you change it to better the organization or better the clients, and then you're able to move on to that next step. So I think, again, it's just encouraging to know that innovation doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to have a safe environment for us to share those ideas, share them with the team, get feedback, and be able to produce great ideas. So I think that's really cool. Throughout this development process, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see organizations make when trying to bring new ideas or products to life? What are some of the hardest areas you see leaders and teams struggle with the most when it comes to innovation, testing, and execution?
Yeah, so probably several. I think there's a lot here in that question. One of the things I think that could be a challenge, and based on the way that I kind of present the information, is we can think innovation is an event and not a discipline. I think the beauty of the different ways I talk about innovation in the book is there were many, many different ways that we could surface innovation, and guess what? We use them all. So we use business plan competitions annually. We used hackathons annually. Like there were many, many different ways that we surfaced innovation, but behind the scenes, there had to be a discipline with how are we actually going to bring that innovation into the rest of our ecosystem, which is already moving very fast. How are we going to embed it? How are we going to work on it? And then how are we actually going to see it through to completion? So sometimes if you surface a lot of great ideas, but you don't see them through, then people get really, really challenged because, it's really short-term thinking, not long-term thinking, which is another challenge, right? Leaders have no lack of things to work on or no lack of ideas. Sometimes we see too many ideas, which creates too many areas of focus. Most companies don't have an idea problem, they have a prioritization problem. So, a lot of what we need to do when all these ideas come in and they come at us is we actually need to take the time to prioritize them. We need to decide as an organization how many new ideas can we work on a year. And if that truth is only three, then great. We have a clear framework of how we're going to move those three big ideas through the organization from start to end so that we don't overwhelm people, which ultimately slows progress when everyone's overwhelmed. And then the other thing, I think about a lot is accountability. So I love great ideas, but they die when there's no one to actually step up, own it, and take accountability over that idea and actually see it through, right? So clear ownership requires us to know what we're building, why we're building it, create milestones, metrics. I talk a lot about in this chapter about scorecards and actually create that follow through end to end. And if we don't do that, then that can be a big, big challenge. And so there's so many, reasons why innovation or ideas fail. The last one I probably want to talk about is just lack of leadership alignment. So, innovation often stalls when leaders are not aligned on priorities, on resources, on risk tolerance, on even what is the desired outcome we want. So, oftentimes we have mixed messages that come through our leadership. And if our leadership team doesn't have psychological safety with one another, I see this unfortunately a lot, but there's infighting over resources, right? So, if we work on and fund your idea, and it's going to cost us $1 million end to end, I also have an idea. I want a fund that costs $500,000. So now I need to position my idea against yours so I win versus us figuring out how can we pool or share resources so we can both achieve what we want to accomplish. And so when psychological safety breaks down in organizations, we compete versus share the resources and attack the problem together. And so those are just some of there's so many more, but those are just some of the challenges we see when we talk about like how do we help some of these ideas actually see the light of day? How do we make sure that we can move our innovation from testing to execution? And execution is key, right? Because it doesn't matter how many good ideas we have. People have good ideas all day long. The challenge is most people fail to actually execute, and execution is king when it comes to innovation.
Yeah, that's good. I like kind of how you were talking about how innovation just needs to be a part of the culture. Like it needs to be what we talk about on a daily basis and be able to have the time during our workday to even think about and to be able to innovate. And so I think that's super important. And it's just super awesome for organizations to just encourage and empower their employees to be able to have those ideas and then also be able to walk them through how to get those ideas out on the table. Um, do you have any other thoughts from this chapter for our listeners today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, when you're thinking about how to get started in innovation, let's say that today you've launched a company or a product and you guys kind of solve one problem and you've been rotating around that one problem for years and you know that in order to survive, you have to think more innovatively. I would start by aligning the team around problems that are worth solving. So think through, what are the problems that are worth solving for us, and then build a simple and repeatable system that will allow you guys to test and learn, understanding that not everything you test is going to work, not everything you test is going to win, and then create accountability structures, meaning who owns the idea, who's going to see it through, who's the team that's going to help, and then how do we measure the outcome? So when something fails, well, what was our scorecard? Was it realistic? And do we know that that's, exactly what we needed to do in order to create a success metric around that? So we want to embed into our culture curiosity, experimentation, continuous improvement, and we want to remove a fear of failure. I think that's the key to everything we're talking about here and what we want to build with innovation. We want to make sure that we create people and teams that are ready to win, but not afraid to fail. And I think that's really the key to this chapter in particular on building these product development systems that help us to win with whatever we're trying to build.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Natalie, for today. Where can people find and follow you?
Yes, so of course, head over to setitonfire.co to learn more about the book. Set It On Fire is the name of the book, The Art of Innovation. And then you can follow me almost on every platform at Innovation Meets Leadership. Well, awesome. This has been fun, Moriah. Thank you again for taking the time to interview me. And I just want to tell all of our listeners out there, thank you for listening to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It On Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.